right, I'm Neighborhood News Editor Gary Nager with a Neighborhood News Online special report on the COVID-19 outbreak. And with me is Peter Pitts, a former Associate Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration and the founder and president of the Center for Medicine in the Public Interest in New York City. Peter and I have known each other since we were neighbors growing up in Woodmere, Long Island, and we went to the same schools together from kindergarten through high school. Welcome and thanks for joining us today, Peter. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And I had to, our age group has aged very gracefully.
Yeah, I think we have. I'm giving us credit for aging gracefully. I agree with you. And first of all, before we start, what street did you live on? Because we lived around the corner from each other somewhere too.
I lived on Benton Street.
Benton Street, yeah. So off of Lefferts Road over there.
And the big issue was, I guess, East Broadway was like the big street to cross.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that was a big deal for us. We weren't allowed to cross East Broadway, a two-lane highway. I agree with you. All right. So number one, first just tell me about your background and why CNN, Fox News, I originally saw you flipping through the channels on the 700 Club, have all been interviewing you about COVID-19. I know you've been a university professor, but are you a medical doctor or a PhD or both?
No, I'm just a healthcare geek. So I was Associate Commissioner at the FDA. And I'm not a scientist, but I understand the environment with which science gets developed and kind of moves through the system, and then how it can be picked up by physicians and other types of practitioners. So more of the health policy front, not so much the actual patient front. So I'm talking on all these media outlets, and I'll talk to anybody that asks, trying to explain how the system works and why it's important to understand the kind of the ecosystem and how we fall in it, and especially relative to containing the coronavirus.
Exactly. All right, so tell me, what exactly is the Center for Medicine in the Public Interest and what does it do?
So cmpi.org, is a not-for-profit think tank. And initially we were founded after I left the FDA to continue to think about ways the FDA can be dragged kicking and screaming into the 21st century. New tools to review drugs, more power put behind the patient voice, how these drugs are used in the real world, different ways to collect evidence. And we've morphed over time to think about broader healthcare policy issues outside of the regulatory area in the U.S. as well as around the world.
And obviously you're in New York City, so how are things going there? Have they passed the plateau of cases for coronavirus?
Well, I think the whole concept of social distancing and sheltering in place is so contrary to the nature of New Yorkers, and especially people that live in Manhattan. But I think that we've really embraced it. I think we recognize that the way to help, not just ourselves, but our neighbors and our community, our city, is to do the right thing. And right now, doing the right thing is sitting on our behinds and watching television, unfortunately. Yeah. But it's really working. And I think that the job that our governor has done in terms of communicating what's happening in the state to the citizens has been terrific. He's been factual, he's been funny, he's been serious, and as a result, I think we're taking it seriously.
Absolutely. And then, of course, the big difference between having lived in both, in New York and down here, is also the whole public transportation system. I know for at least the first couple of weeks, you were still seeing images of people like in packed subway cars. Has there been social distancing in public transportation as well that you've seen?
Well, I think the issue with public transportation is that, for those that are still going to work and are largely dependent on public transportation, it's been a mixed bag. Obviously, you don't want to be in a subway car or a bus with even 6 people, let alone 60 people. But it's a question of people having to get to their jobs. But I think we've been good relative to keeping distance, wearing masks, so that's been a bit tough. Because again, that also focuses on New Yorkers' ability to speak their minds to people they don't know. So masking has helped, but I think just the overall awareness of why it's important to keep distance has really helped get the job done.
Okay, so let's talk a second about the FDA. When you were with the FDA, how long did it usually take for vaccines to be approved for use by humans? And how long do you believe it will take for a vaccine to be developed for this particular coronavirus? Can the timeline to develop a vaccine really be fast-tracked?
Well, I think the quick answer to that is yes, it can be fast-tracked, but there are different types of vaccines and obviously different types of timelines. For diseases like polio or pertussis, whooping cough, those types of vaccines take time, animal trials, human trials, the whole FDA rigmarole, and you're talking years. Right. And then also the concept of manufacturing vaccines is extremely complicated, and our capacity is pretty low. and that's going to be important relative to COVID-19. When are we going to see a COVID-19 vaccine? There are lots of companies working independently and together with governments, with academia, all around the world. It's really been
I hear there's at least 70, right?
It's an all hands on deck proposition, all sorts of interesting methodologies and mechanisms of action. So I'm pretty optimistic. I think that with this type of collaboration and focus, 10 months to a year, and that's incredibly fast.
Right.
That's almost as fast as the annual flu vaccine, where we actually understand that virus, every which way to Sunday.
Right.
So I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish, but I say, if I was going to place a bet, I would say a year is a pretty safe bet, and that's really fast. But then the question becomes, where do you find the manufacturing capabilities to make the vaccine for hundreds of millions of people, and how do you prioritize who gets it first, second, third, and so forth?
Obviously, we have to have our healthcare workers who are on the front lines and are such heroes in this, vaccinated. Seems like we also have to have any food service people also have to be considered among the first to receive vaccines once it does happen.
Sure, your doctors, nurses, health techs, firefighters, police officers, the people that are stocking supermarket shelves. The whole idea about what does essential workers mean, I think has been pretty clear these days. But you don't want it to be people exclusively on the lower end of the economic scale. We want everybody to be able to get back to work. And that begins to kind of focus in on how do you kind of reopen the economy smartly in phases.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about here in Florida, because I know you're not here, but I'm sure you know plenty of people who are here. And I'm just quoting the stats here. We have a population of about 21.48 million. As of this morning, according to the Florida Department of Health, we have about 28,000 cases, 4,200 people have been hospitalized, and 867 deaths. Obviously, a lot fewer people than what's going on in New York and even New Jersey now, Massachusetts. And the two counties that I serve, I have New Tampa Neighborhood News, which is in Hillsborough County, and Wesley Chapel Neighborhood News, which is in Pasco County. Hillsborough County has been fairly hard hit, more hard hit than anywhere else other than South Florida here in Florida, with about 1,000 cases, 150 or so hospitalizations, and 20 people who have died from suspected COVID-19. And then in Pasco, we've had 213 cases, 47 hospitalizations, and 3 deaths as of this morning. So it seems like social distancing has worked because it didn't hit here immediately right away, but that still seems like fairly low numbers. Are we just much further from our plateau, do you think? Or do you think that because of social distancing and the lack of, crowded public transportation, et cetera, that we're going to be able to keep our numbers fairly low?
Well, the thing about numbers is they're really important, and the only thing worse than no numbers are bad numbers.
Right.
So with a lack of testing, we all have to kind of ramp up the whole testing conversation too. Is what do the real numbers look like? But let's assume for a second that some areas are higher than others. That just makes sense. In New York, for example, my philosophy is that New York has taken a bullet for a large part of the country.
Yeah.
By shutting ourselves down, and because of the size of the city, the amount that people in New York travel, we've kept our issues out of everybody else's environment. So that's important. So in a place like Florida, obviously you don't want 20 million plus people flocking to the beach.
Right.
But the idea isn't, gee, there's nothing wrong here in our town. It's business as usual. Viruses are living things. They're very wily.
Right.
Mother Nature generally wins, and when we let our guard down, it's just going to swoop in and slap us in the head in an awful kind of way. Because the people that are going to be most impacted by a second wave of coronavirus, which will definitely come at some point, are those communities that have not yet had coronavirus.
Right.
So it's really important to be on our guard, regardless of where you are. And again, numbers count.
Absolutely. And then obviously everyone's talking about testing, ramping up testing. At what point do we have to just all be tested on an ongoing basis for this particular virus and be able to, really get a real feel for who's had it and who hasn't had it, and what we have to do in order to continue to maintain fairly low numbers here and really all over the country?
Well, like with everything else, knowledge is power. And as you mentioned, there are 2 types of tests. The first test is, do you have coronavirus? And that's important because you want to make sure you're treating people properly. But also it's incredibly crucial to track who has already had the virus. This is what's called convalescent plasma testing. And again, for two reasons. If you've had the virus, you can have a certain degree of immunity. We're not quite sure what type yet. And those people can also be kind of prioritized relative to going back to work. But also, we want to identify these people so that we can harvest their blood, get blood transfusions to other people. And again, this isn't a cure or a preventative. It's a treatment once you've already been infected. But again, incredibly important.
Absolutely. I do understand there are some members of our high school graduating class who also have contracted, coronavirus and have come back out on the other side. They're all very interested in getting antibody testing done on themselves so that they can help others. How soon do you think that's really going to happen?
There are some tests that have been approved. A lot are being considered. I think what we're really waiting for here are at-home tests you can take, kind of like at-home pregnancy tests, where you can actually do it at home, get a reading, and then pursue your life based on what that data shows you.
And then, do you think that Florida's relatively low case numbers can at least be in part attributable to the hot weather we've been experiencing? We've had a heat wave here, very little rain, lots of hot weather. Do you believe that even hotter summer temperatures will reduce the spread of this virus as was originally suspected?
Well, these types of viruses don't like heat. And I think if you look at the annualized numbers for Florida for the annual flu, you'll also see a below average index for the population. So I would say that's certainly a good thing. I'd rather be in a hot place than a cool place, but it is by no means a one size fits all solution.
Absolutely. Okay, and then so Pasco County in particular, when people started saying we needed to shut things down, and that was going on 4 weeks ago now, I think that part of the reason that we seem to have fairly low numbers in Pasco is because the only places that people really congregate, Pasco doesn't really have great beaches, so it's not really a beach community as Pinellas County is, but we have, just shopping malls, restaurants, places like that, and obviously grocery stores and Walmart. But once people started social distancing, maybe that's what helped kind of keep the numbers down because of that, and hopefully we'll be able to maintain that. Is that something that you think will be able to be maintained even after people start to go back to work?
I think that's exactly the right approach. The way that we're going to deal with reopening the economy before we have a vaccine is to embrace the concepts of social distancing, really understanding how viruses live and die. So I think we'll be going back to work. We'll have staggered work hours. We'll be wearing masks. People will be working from home. We'll embrace technology. We're going to have to continue on really understanding and practicing better hygiene.
Right.
And to me, with that, the headline there is what's going to kill coronavirus and allow us to get back to work is personal responsibility. Again, short of a vaccine, but it's in our hands. If we're smart and we do it strategically, it'll work.
All right. Well, here in Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis seems to be interested in following the lead of the Georgia Governor, Brian Kemp, to reopen things sooner even than the May 1st recommendation that the president's task force was talking about for 4 mainly rural states. So how can we possibly open it back up and still be okay? I need a haircut like nobody's business, but what do you do? How can you open it up other than just wearing masks and gloves and not throwing the gloves away on the ground, but actually throwing them away in a trash receptacle so that they're not, whatever germs are on there are not getting through to other people?
Yeah, just on that note, I walk my dog a couple of times a day. My dog is loving sheltering in place. I unfortunately am seeing a glove all over the place. People must not do that. I think that it shows people don't understand the concept of what's going on. But I think it's relative to how do you decide when to open the economy. One metric for me is 14 consecutive days decline in new COVID cases.
Right.
I think that's a solid number. 14 days, is that a long time or a little time? That seems to be the number everybody's using.
Okay.
And it's practical. And I think that you have to be honest. And if you're having a decline, you can make a decision. And if you're not, that has to inform your decision as well. This shouldn't be political. I mean, clearly, sheltering in place is one thing if you have an income and nice space. Sheltering is something else if you don't.
Right,
and
absolutely.
You have to understand that some people are willing to accept higher risks because that fits into their subset of needs, and that's also, I think, appropriate to take into consideration.
Now, I realize that you've written multiple books, but I understand there's one that's out there right now, Common Sense Healthcare Policy for Common Sense Americans and Presidential Candidates or Political Candidates. Tell me about that book and where people can get it, and is it related to what's going on now?
Well, first of all, the book is on Amazon and Google, and there's a free copy at cmpi.org if you want to use an e-reader. But I think that, it's on a variety of topics, but the general theme is that healthcare reform is urgent, it's complicated, it's an ecosystem, and soundbite solutions aren't going to get us anywhere. And on the back cover of the book, I say, if you talk to a political candidate, ask them how their healthcare plan impacts things like innovation. And if they can't answer your question, tell me, and I'll send them a copy of the book for free. There are no easy answers, and I know Governor DeSantis and I have butted heads on things like drug importation. And I'm all for a robust conversation on a variety of ideas, but you have to ultimately allow the facts to win.
Well, Peter Pitts of the Center for Medicine and the Public Interest, and Mrs. Bodycomb's kindergarten class that I've known you since. Thank you so much for joining us here on Neighborhood News Online. I really appreciate it.
But I have to add that our graduating class, clearly the best and the brightest, the most handsome, the best preserved. We're knocking it out of the park.
Oh, Peter, thank you so much, Peter Pitts. And I'll see you, I'm sure, on Fox News and CNN. So both sides are interviewing you. So I'm really proud to have had you on the show today, and I appreciate you very much. Thanks, Peter.
My pleasure, Gary. Nice catching up.
Same to you. Thanks.